In this week's dvar torah, Parshas Vayigash, zechus refuah for Eitan ben Batsheva and Erez ben Hadas, among the other shvuyim, and for refuah for Chaim Dov and Minah and Avraham Nechemia ben Braynah, b'soch shar Cholei Yisrael. This week's dvar torah is based on a train of thought I found in a new sefer on Chumash, Dvar. I found this train of thought very fascinating. So in the end of Parshas Miketz, we see that Yosef plants the cup in Binyamin's sack, and he has him brought back to Mitzrayim. And he accosts them, "What did you do? I was so good to you, and you've been Mishayim Ra Tachas Tova. Look how you repay me by stealing my precious cup." And Yehuda says, "What can we say? What can we do? Hashem has found us guilty, and we're prepared to be your servants, us together with Binyamin." And the Mefarshim explain that this is where they came to a recognition for the first time that the selling of Yosef itself was an Aveira, not just the way that they had treated him, but the selling itself. And they said, this is a midah keneged midah. Hashem is paying us back for selling him into slavery. We're going to be sold into slavery. So they said, okay, this is Hashem Gezerah. We accept it. And they basically telling Yosef that as well. According to the Svarno, they're telling him it's a more passive aggressive a little bit, that Hashem could punish us in many ways. Hashem chooses to punish, is voted through to bring bad things about through Rishon. Hashem will take care of you. But at the end of the day, they're being very submissive. And Yosef says, Chas v'sholom, it has nothing to do with your previous Averos. I just thought this is all about the cup. I want him as a servant. The rest of you are free to go back to your father. Suddenly, what happens in the next parsha? Vayigash Lev Yehuda, and he says, Ki chamocha kaparo, where Rashi brings from Chazal, I'm prepared to kill you and to wipe out your master as well. That he's being very, very harsh with him. He says, Ayichapcha, don't get angry. But he's a very aggressive position with Yosef. The Malachim came to watch the fight between Yosef and Yehuda, the two great kings to come and fight. And Yehuda's whole demeanor changes, and he's showing his physical power. Midrashim talk about how he showed his physical strength. Apparently it's taken literally, that he showed him how he can break an iron bar with his teeth. And he showed him that you're not going to be a match for us. It's up to you. If you want us to be an avadim, if you want me to be an Eved in his place, I'm prepared to stay, I assume, because that's my punishment for selling my brother. If you want to keep Binyamin, we're going to have a war. The Dvar Yaakov raises the question that Mefarshim ask, what changed suddenly? Why is he suddenly switching gears so much from being submissive to being a fighter? So the Mefarshim explain, specifically and focus on the approach, the Ohr Hachaim at the end of Miketz and the Lev Eliyahu and the Lev Eliyahu, they explain that originally the brothers calculated this was punishment for selling Yosef. So they felt this is Hashem's Gezerah, and so we're prepared to accept it. The Medrash explains they searched through themselves. This was the only Averos that they had ever done. I guess Yehuda and Reuben, because they're paradigms for the tshuva that they did for what they may have done wrong. So this is and the Medrash is made in Parshas Nasa. This is the only things that they ever did wrong was the treatment of Yosef. So they said, okay, so this is what we deserve it for. It makes sense. But when they realized that Yosef only wants Binyamin, they said, wait a second. Binyamin never did any Averos, because Atas is one of the ones who never did any Averos in his life. So this is obviously not a Gezerah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what is this? This is a Rasha trying to harm us. So a Rasha trying to harm us, we have every right to fight back, and they basically make it clear that they're prepared to fight back. In other words, even though everything that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a difference between Hashem's Gezerah, which they feel they should accept, and a Rasha trying to harm them, which they feel that they should be fighting back. Reminds me of a similar vart. Rav Chanan Wasserman writes about the difference in the Jewish approach to Hanukkah and in the Jewish approach by the Purim story, that in the Purim story they were physically threatened, that they're going to laharogu lashmit, to kill all the Jews. And yet their approach is not to take up arms and fight back. Their main approach is to daven and do tshuva. And then Hanukkah, they're threatened with religious persecution, that the Yevonim are trying to get them to stop observing Torah and mitzvos, and their approach is to take up swords and fight back. What seems should be the opposite. And Rav Elchanan explains that when the enemy is when it's a decree on our bodies to wipe us out, so we know that such a thing, we recognize it as a gezerah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this is Hashem decreeing this upon us to bring us to tshuva, and that's the approach. Fighting back is not the solution. It's not going to be the main source of hatzachim. We know that they did fight back at a later point when the end of the day, there is a war at the end, but the main approach is the main zechus for us is to daven and learn Torah and do tshuva. The brothers, they daven and they tear sackcloth and they come back to Mitzrayim. But at the same time, when the Chanukah story, he says that's a ma'aseh satan. When the whole thing is just to take us away from Torah and mitzvahs, that's not a Kadosh Baruch Hu's gezerah. Hashem doesn't want us to be taken away from Torah and mitzvahs. That's the satan, that's a ma'aseh satan. That's the forces of evil being given a chance to reign. And the approach to that, our biggest zechus, is to take up arms and fight, to be moiser nefesh for what we believe in, to show that we're prepared to give up our lives and fight back to defend our value system. And that, in that situation, that's our biggest zechus. And so too over here, the brothers see that they're being attacked, and it's not a gezerah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's a Rasha trying to harm them, and they're prepared to take up arms, they're prepared to fight back. This idea of there's times when our main zechus is to daven and do tshuva, and there are times, which of course we always try to do, but there are times when we really are being called to fight back, and that's our main avodah, and then there are times when overall the approach is to accept Hashem's gezerah. Fascinating measures. There's the story of the Asar Harugei Malchus. Rabbi Shmuel, the Kohen Gadol, he goes up to Shemayim with the Shem Hamafurish, and he finds out that he basically went to check. Is this something we should accept, or should we be fighting back? And the response he got in Shemayim was, no, this is a gezerah that has to do with Mechiras Yosef, and you should accept it. And Kachave, they didn't fight back. And he brings a bryce at the end of Maseches Kala. There's a story with one of the 10 martyrs, was Rabbi Chanina ben Trajon. The story in the Kinna talks about how he was wrapped in the Sefer Torah, and they put the wool over his chest to make sure that he would suffer longer, and he said the letters are flying up to Shemayim. And so the version in the Bryce is a little bit different. Over there, it says that he was actually bothered. Is this a punishment for a certain aveira I did involving mixing up Malas Purim and Malas Tzedakah? And so the executioner is trying to burn him. He sees the fire is not touching him. He says, what's going on here? So Rabbi Chanina ben Traja tells him, I made a deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I first have to find out if I'm worthy of being punished, if this is a punishment for something. So give me an hour. The guy's scratching his head. He's saying, these people can choose if fire can harm them, and we're ruling over them? He says, I don't get it. So at the end he says, all right, after an hour, now I see it's examined Shemayim, go ahead and kill me. And he says, you should just know that Hashem has many agents to kill me. Hashem is choosing you, because Me'ersham Yatzarash, Hashem wants to take vengeance upon you. The guy's like, this is not happening. He throws himself into the fire. And he says, I'm dying with you, Rabbi. And Abaskol comes out, Rabbi Chanina and his executioner are mezumin for Chai Olam Haba. And Erez Yopian also brings up that we find many stories in Chazal where they seem to have the power to disintegrate an enemy by, as they look at somebody and he turns into a pile of dust and bones. But we don't seem to believe this. Then how are they being persecuted? And it seems that they felt that this was the Ratzon Hashem, that they should take it. And so that's why they took it, not because they had to take it. Whether he's actually saying literally that the rabbis had the power to vaporize entire enemies, I'm not sure. I don't know. We find Cholei Yisrael is compared to a sheep among 70 wolves. A sheep is among the most defenseless of animals. Not sure. But it does seem that there's this idea that a lot of times that they accepted the gezerah upon themselves, and that's why, and when it befell them, instead of trying to fight back. And we find actually this famous story with the Vilna Gaon. Ger Tzedek, when he was taken prisoner, before he was going to be killed, the Vilna Gaon offered to use Kabbalah to break him out of prison. Famous story. The Vilna Gaon himself was in prison twice. Many Tanaim were in prison, then killed. We don't find that they used Kabbalah to break themselves out of prison. So it seems like there was a certain sense of when to fight back and when not to fight back. Obviously, in today's world, we fight back and we defend ourselves just like they did in all these times, in all these wars, they always fought back because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. The story of the brothers was unique in the sense that they felt that this, and the 10 martyrs in particular, a specific situation where they felt that Hashem wanted them to be taken, and that's why they allowed themselves to be taken and not use the powers at their capacity to protect themselves. But to me, this is just a lesson in the power of the Jewish people and in the internal strength that we've always had and always tapped into. May Hashem fight our wars and bring an end to our suffering and bring the Gula Shlema B'Kar. Have a wonderful Shabbos.